Hello dear listeners, and welcome to the lecture today on the topic of human security. Now, when we try to understand international relations, security has been one of the key areas of study. Security has been the main axis around which the beginning of IR has always focused on. When we look at the realist discourse, the first concrete theory in IR, the realist theory, which gave us an understanding of how the relationships between and amongst nations go forward. Security was one of the key concerns. Fear of attack by the other, fear of securing their own space with respect to retaliation by the other, securing their national interests, were some of the key areas which made security as the key focus in international relations. Now, this security later in the post-Cold War scenario was seen in different ways. Let us understand here. History witnessed two great wars, the First World War and the Second World War. After the end of the Second World War, when United States bombs Hiroshima and Nagasaki, world was on a very different plane. There was fear of another war, and at that time Hans Morgenthau, trying to understand international relations by 6 principles of political realism, which we often also call as classical realism. The classical realist ideas were later made as scientific theory of international relations by Kenneth Waltz in neorealism. Now, within this realism and neorealism, security was seen in the sense of domination, in the sense of control, in the sense of assertion. This definition of security, this understanding of security gave primacy to the idea of control over. Control could be over territory, over resources, over territory, people, and many other things. This definition of security was military in its larger interpretation. It gave primacy to the use of armed forces in order to secure states' national interests. Now, after the Second World War, the world witnessed a long phase of the Cold War. The Cold War, where an actual no war took place, was more like a propaganda war. It was more like an ideological war. And within that, there were 3 phases. If we are to sum up the rise of Cold War, wherein in the first phase we saw that how the 2 superpowers, United States versus USSR, in the quest for their supremacy over world affairs, were literally involved in a deadlock crisis of Cuban Missile Crisis, followed by detent and followed by how the Afghan war happens and Cold War comes to an end with dissolution of USSR and liberal democracy with United States emerging as victorious. Now, once this phase of Cold War gets over, there was a reinterpretation of what security implies. Herein, it is very essential to understand the UNDP report of 1994, which tries to give a multi-dimensional approach towards human security. It says that human security is a way broader term than the traditional understanding of security. Today, power in international relations is porous because the state exists with other non-state actors. Global governance that comes after the Second World War had its own challenges as well as opportunities. And within this paradigm, security cannot be just seen in a crude militaristic sense. Security cannot be just understood in the sense of absolute retaliation or absolute taking care of things. Today, traditional dimensions exist with non-traditional dimensions. In the traditional dimension of security, your threats were known. But here, in the non-traditional dimensions of security, though of course threats are known, but threats have acquired new form, and the threats cuts across nation. The threats equally affect the developed vis-a-vis the developing world. To take an example here, climate change, migration, pandemics, narcotics, international terrorism, many others. So therefore, when we look at security, then we are looking at a larger holistic framework. We cannot just see security as a monologue of control and domination vis-a-vis the military resources. Security today is way much more rampant, and today this widespread idea of security is understood as human security in the discipline of international relations. Let us now take the 7 parameters of human security one by one and then understand what gives them more significance in international relations. First, economic security. Dear listeners, you all would agree with us that globalization led to rampant interdependence. Interdependence was juxtaposed with integration, exchange of goods, services and people. Now this exchange of goods, services and people, the rise of international institutions to manage global trade and finance was also accompanied with certain kind of divisions. The gains from economic integration were not equal for all. The rules of operation for international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, or for global trade regime like the World Trade Organization, they were not fair and just for all. Some countries gained more in the bargain, some countries' position was the same. So, quite often, if you are to take another theoretical assumption here, Immanuel Wallerstein gave a Marxist understanding of the global processes, that globalization is nothing but extension of capitalist process of exploitation and domination by the rich states over the poor states. So within all this scenario, economic security comes into play. When you look at economic security, certain important variables here, because today poverty is rampant. Today, of course, there is rise of multinational corporations, but at the same time, jobless growth is also a fact in many countries. Today, when we are seeing that capital and labor are being pegged as mobile factors, at the same time, there is rise of contractualization of labor, which privileges forces of capital accumulation and profit more over the hard work tendered by labor. So within all these things, where there is issues of rise of GDP numbers, the same time there is an aspect of people are really thinking that is this rise in GDP number sufficient enough to cater to unemployment, because the processes of economic forces that made globalization work somewhere favored rich countries more over the poor, somewhere favored the developed world more over the developing world. And within all this paradigm, economic security puts before us a big question of North versus South, jobs versus growth, development versus livelihood and welfare, wherein in the state and market debate, the state is receding and market is taking its place. So we have to see at what basis is the market taking space over the forces of state, namely contractualization, decline in welfare services, amongst others, in the quest to balance fiscal discipline. So all these raises a big question that can security be then just reduced to arms and ammunition? The answer is no. Therefore, the UNDP report asks us to look at the economic avenues which have an impact on the larger well-being, existence and security of individuals. Next, food security. Food is, as we know, an essential component of existence. Food is the basis of our survival. But within this basis of survival, what is essential to be seen that at one point of the globe there are developed worlds which have huge amount of resources. At the other side, till today, there are many people, facts are many, but still there are many people who are not even able to afford 2 square meals a day. We have the World Trade Organization, wherein as a component of that we have the GATT, General Agreement on Trades and Tariff. Within GATT we have AOA, Articles on Agreement, which deal elaborately with agriculture. Now, agriculture is very essential to understand the notion of food security, because when the developed world subsidizes its agriculture, which is in a very microscopic minority segment there, vis-a-vis the developing world, wherein agriculture is the main source of survival, and in order to join the WTO bandwagon, they cannot subsidize their agriculture. So therefore, the rules of the game of international trade regime has been at a disfavor, a disjuncture towards the developing world, and this once again places the notion of security to a challenging task, because when people cannot even afford 2 square meals a day, can we really call that state secure enough? So therefore, today food security has become an important component of understanding of in the comprehension of the discourse of international global political issues. Now also at the same time, when we look at food security, very essential, how are the forces of global economic integration working here? Today we have patents that favor once again the rich countries over the poor. The patents put the developed world at an advantage with respect to the underdeveloped world, and agriculture definitely is a case here. Certain practices of consumerism, affluence definitely places the poor in the world at a disadvantage. We hear about big mega events that are being organized. We hear about the concept of big fat weddings that are taking place. But at the same time, one cannot even ignore that within this paradigm of mass consumerism, that somewhere global forces are responsible to usher in. There are many people in the world who are victims of lack of availability of food. Moving ahead, when we look at another paradigm that security asks us to think on with the concept of human security is our health. Now let's understand, today we are facing various kinds of pandemics, swine flu, bird flu. Today we are facing new kinds of diseases, new kinds of bacteria, new kinds of cancers. Where is all this coming forward from? What is said is that today when we bargained ourselves into the globalization process, at the same time somewhere we made a big compromise, and one of the areas which is seen to have made a big compromise is health. Let's understand. Today, there is rise of big pharmaceutical companies who are giants. Today, there is a big competition to get patents for medicine. But at the same time, rising cost of medicines puts the questions of affordability and accessibility of medicines towards a larger segment of world population that cannot afford those expensive drugs. Today, there is rise of various kinds of new diseases, and somewhere with the outbreak of pandemics, a threat that cuts across borders, the states are at a disadvantage definitely in respect to the other states. So when we look at security then here, can we once again just say that security is all about how secure I am with the help of my armed forces? No, because when mass population of a country is suffering from new kinds of pandemics, the nation's security is definitely not complete. And this problem of health security, there are common parameters in every country. In every country today, there is a problem of rise in cost of basic medicines. In every country, there is a problem that there are not a sufficient number of hospital beds to cater to patients. So, health security is an important component of understanding global political situation. Issues of vaccination, issues of looking after war-torn refugees and countries which definitely have a huge impact on their health, issues of radiations connected with the proliferation of nuclear weapons and their testing. All these are correlated because global world is marked by interdependence. Interdependence, dear listeners, brings with itself two factors together, that is positives as well as the negatives. So when we look at that till today, infant mortality rate, there are glaring numbers and this problem needs to be tackled. Or when we look at female infanticide, there is a big challenge and this needs to be tackled. So all this presents a comprehensive picture that health is an important component for any state to call itself secure enough. Now, one interesting thing that we are seeing in our discussion on economic security, food security, and now health security, that security and this concept of human security per se has taken away the focus from the state towards the individual. This also speaks about how the nature of global politics and international relations has undergone a change with the end of the Cold War, with the rise of a multipolar world. Moving ahead to comprehend security, we cannot call ourselves secure unless and until we understand environment. Now, when we look at environment, after the Cold War, after the Second World War, world was on the path of industrialization. Now, industrialization and urbanization, expansion of population brought with itself certain amount of big challenges. And one of the big challenges was environment. Let me quote here an important work, Rachel Carson's book, that is The Silent Spring, that talks about how in the era of 1962, 1964, 5, because of this industrialization, there were loss of biodiversity, loss of flora and fauna. This told us that how within this human security paradigm, we have to see that our environment is an important factor. And this tells us that this human security is an emerging concept for understanding our international security now. As we said that it was the United Nations Development Program that coined and published the report on human security. And when we look at the context, that's end of Cold War, the same time environment was a challenge. When we look at Kyoto Protocol, Montreal Protocol, when we look at Copenhagen Summit, these rise of norms and regimes to cater to environment and the larger issue of pollution, loss of biodiversity, impact on flora and fauna, definitely tells us that today security is in a multi-dimensional perspective, and this security is in a universal scope. By universal, we mean that challenges of food, challenges of economics, challenges of environment, challenges of health, they are being faced by all countries alike. When we look at climate change or the melting of glaciers, or when we hear about the heating of the Earth's atmosphere because of entry of ozone layer into the stratosphere, tells us that today security that was understood by the realist and neo-realist, that is dominance, that is changing. So therefore, human security urges us to think differently as compared from the traditional approach to security, and we need not then look at the state as the only primary referent object. We have to look at security, as we said, in its multi-dimensional nature. Now, when we look at all this paradigm, that is issues of globalization, issues of transnational dangers, issues of post-Cold War scenario, this definitely tells us that international relations, because of this concept of human security, witnessed new horizons. Let me quote few thinkers here for you. Mark Fallana and Kong in their work say that the link between human security and international insecurity has been invigorated. We have to see that we cannot really call ourselves secure in the international realm unless and until we look at these 7 parameters of human security. Let me quote another significant thinker here, Barry Buzan, who talks about that how there are new sectors of security, be it be environment, be it be social, be it be economic, who challenge the contemporary, who present a new perspective on the definitions of security in the contemporary realm. Now, within this paradigm of human security, dear listeners, we have to see that there are schools of thought, that is freedom from want and freedom from fear. Let's take freedom from fear one first. Now, freedom from fear, as the name very much says, fear has been one of the guiding axioms to understand the realist discourse. This idea of freedom from fear limits human security to the notion of protecting the individual, say from violence, say need for emergency assistance or conflict resolution, or even to attempts for peace building. When we look at the other concept, that is freedom from want, this is a holistic concept. This is where human security comes in, that is hunger, diseases, natural disaster, environmental issues, economic disparity, food issues, health factors. These all are security issues too. These all are security threats as well, and they demand an emphasis on development. So what we see here is that the realist school and the neo-realist school thought of security in a very rational, masculine way. If we borrow these lines from the feminist discourse, the concept of human security with the UNDP report in 1994 is giving a normative turn to the understanding of security. It presents forward heavy ethical questions that the actors need to take into account, and also puts forward for the need for appropriate international standards to deal with its all 7 factors. And there is definitely a turn here that is in place of state, the concept of human security, by giving primacy to norms, to ethical responsibility, is making individual as a referent. Now this definitely is a 360-degree turn, if we say, in the understanding of international relations, because the state by the realists, neo-realists, liberals was seen as a rational unit of analysis. The state was the primary unit to understand international relations. But human security gives a different dimension to the foundation for different way of thinking, if we may say. So what we say here is that conceptualizing or shaping a positive vision in a policy domain, this is one of the benefits of the concept of human security in global political affairs. Besides just having an innovative approach, it asks us to look at policies in a holistic, positive vision. So therefore, when we try to debate the intellectual agenda of human security, definitely one can say that it has progressive intentions. And at the same time, when it tries to give a holistic preview to the understanding of international relations, human security then definitely is adding more to the analytical capability and the factors thereof that international relations earlier ignored. And definitely it adds moral, ethical, ideational foundations of policies and politics in comprehension of IR and global politics thereof. At the same time, it accelerates multilateral humanitarian efforts of the world community when it's trying to present forward issues of economics, environment, food, health, to name a few. Definitely, it gives onus for acceleration of multilateral humanitarian efforts from the world community. So therefore, there are definite advantages of comprehension and inclusion of the concept of human security in international relations, giving positive vision to policy domain and doing away with the errors of just placing security on a unilateral, unilinear perspective, adding more in the sense of multidimensional perspective and including moral, ethical and ideational factors too. Now, human security has become a point of departure which the UN, United Nations and the world too also needed after the end of the bipolar system which we all saw during the Cold War. Human security has become a much better comprehension to explain world which is multipolar. This also cements and mainstreams the human-oriented activities of the United Nations. Let's point here, when we look at the UNDP report of 1994, there are associations like United Nations Trust Fund for Human Security that institutionalizes the policies of human security. When we look at the peacekeeping forces, the peacekeeping missions, outreach program, humanitarian assistance, all this can be justified by the rationale of human security. This concept of human security then legitimizes the humanitarian intervention, because security can just not be seen with a microscopic perspective of arms and ammunition. Security needs a broader understanding with looking at the factors that also have an impact on human lives, as we saw, health, food, environment and economics and many more others too. So therefore, human security then is very essential to comprehend the world which is no longer bipolar, to comprehend the world where definitely there is no definite hegemon. Like when we look at hegemonic stability theory, though hegemon has always given a certain kind of leadership to world affairs, but today this hegemon is operating on a multiple polar basis because there are multiple power centers. The human security approach has attempted to transform the traditional notion of security. Earlier, security was just seen in the sense of power, control, domination. But today, security is seen in the sense of care, nurture, humanitarian help, ethics and larger positive visions over policy outcomes. So therefore, the definition of human security remains an open question, because when there are so many factors to look at security from your economics, environment, health, so therefore human security too definitely remains an open question. There is a consensus amongst the various proponents and advocates of human security that there should be a shift of attention from state-centered to people-centered approach to the study of IR. Now, why is it that we have somewhere agreed to take on individual as the referent vis-a-vis the state? Here what we see that new actors are appearing on the scene. Today, when we look at international organizations, private investment companies, NGOs, non-state entities, all these are having an important role to play, an active role in international relations. Security, as if we see the absence of insecurity and threats, then non-state actors, new state actors definitely are casting a doubt on this definition. To be secure is to be free from both kinds of threats. Threats could be physical, cultural, psychological, violence, and also at the same time from the want of unemployment, from issues of health. So therefore, when non-state actors are appearing on the scene today, international organization, our NGOs, civil society, they are making us think about threats in a different kind of way. Threats could be real, threats at the same time could be perceived threats too. At the same time, there is increase in the number of elements that can be called as threats, and this also makes it challenging to study the connections between them. So there is a lack of agreed upon definition, and this is one of the drawbacks of the concept of human security. So at one point we are saying that human security makes international relations much more plural. It makes us debate on the concept of freedom from fear to freedom from want. At the same time, one cannot ignore that there is no agreed definition, no agreed upon definition. So therefore, what is needed? A comprehensive, pluralistic approach to the establishment and the concept of human security. Now, if I can present here, in 1990s, the Copenhagen school emerged as another paradigm shift, and this Copenhagen school presented to us a very significant concept, that is non-military issues can be considered matters of security even if they are not threatening states. So therefore, human security approach stresses and accepts that extreme economic, social distress, epidemics, pandemics, issues of trans-border migration, issues presented by wars and refugees, transnational terrorism, discrimination, violent repression, whatever we can say, issues of authoritarian regimes, all these demand attention in the comprehension of security, because threats and fear may need not just come from armies, military, navy and armed force. It can equally come in a very lethal way from epidemics, pandemics, narcotics, terrorism, unemployment, health issues, so many other. So when we look at today, there are reports that there is illegal trade of drugs, illegal trade of certain kinds of wrong kinds of weapons. All these are two causes for insecurity in people, because let's accept it, we are living in a interdependent world, and therefore a security approach which mainly focuses on state as the axis, which only focuses on military, which only gives a one-dimensional understanding of national interest, then it might not be sufficient enough to give a clear picture of international relations. Now, human security is also closely related to the concept of human rights. Dear listeners, let's understand here. Now, human rights advocates that the goal of human security should be built upon and also strengthen the existing global human rights legal framework. This both human security and human rights, what is significant in similarities between the two, that they use individual as the main referent. Now, NGOs also, if we see, they are important players in the global arena in regard to maintaining human security. Emergence of growing natural and man-made disasters too, NGOs are playing an important role, and they definitely influence the ability to change and enact the government agendas. So at the same time, when we look at human security and environment as a resource in terms of its outreach towards people definitely is under stress, because day by day we are multiplying, but the resources to cater to our needs are limited. If I can quote Mahatma Gandhi here, that there is enough in the world for our need but not for our greed. So therefore this environment is under challenge because of excessive exploitation and domination by the human beings. And then there is an increasing dilemma about the quality of human life, because when we try to tamper the environment more than its reach, when we try to exploit the environment, definitely human life and other kinds of biodiversities of flora and fauna are under threat because of rampant pollution at land, air, water, noise. All these are definitely having a huge problem for quality of human life, and when quality of human life is at stake, human security definitely presents a daunting task and challenge for environment too. So dear listeners, when we look at that today, the concept of human security makes us look at international relations from a holistic perspective. It tries to present to us a new understanding wherein we have to factor in ethics along with other kind of factors that have been existed. The concept of human security takes the focus away from state. It tries to place individual as the basis, and a lot of this understanding of human security comes because of the challenges of the post-Cold War world made us look that threats and fear need not just come from the arms and ammunitions. Threats and fears can come from certain other factors that were hitherto excluded in the understanding of international relations. So therefore today, whenever you try to understand security, have a look at its multi-dimensional nature. Today when we look at security, it has transcended from traditional to non-traditional. Therefore we say that it is universal in scope because the threats cuts across borders. The concept of human security adds more to the understanding of international relations because it challenges the dominance of the notion of security as just fear, as just violence, as presented by the realist and the neo-realist schools of thought. So therefore it tries to add individual as the factor in its approach to understand IR, and by adding more to the traditional approach of security, which would just look at state as the primary referent object. Now, when we look at human security, very essential to see economic growth, internal conflicts, globalizations, transnational dangers, realities of the post-Cold War world, human rights, environment, food security, health issues, community issues, personal security too. Because when we look at it, today globalization is marked by rampant technology, but at the same time, if technology connects one person to the other, but at the same time cyber risk poses the security of the person at halt some time. So what we see here is that today IR has come from a high power terrain to a soft power terrain, and somewhere when we try to put IR at the soft power paradigm, human security then with all its 7 factors definitely is an important issue to be pondered over. Now again, as we say that it has invigorated the idea of international security, and this is a new challenging area which makes us see that today freedom from fear is definitely distinct from freedom from want, whereas freedom from fear may be a limited concept in understanding of IR, but freedom from want, by including societal, cultural, environmental, economic, personal, community, all these factors gives us a holistic approach in the understanding of IR, because hunger is equally threatful as a war, because poverty and is equally dreadful as a military assault, because unemployment is equally harmful and threatful as any other kind of distress. So human security definitely gives a normative turns by its deep ethical foundations, and definitely gives impetus to human civilization for the need for appropriate international standards with individual as the referent, and paving way for foundations of a new ethical world wherein humanitarian intervention may be justified, looking at the time when humanity is in crisis. So when we try to look at this entire paradigm of human security, at one point it has definitely added more to the intellectual agenda of global politics. It is said to have added progressive intentions and positive outcomes in policy domain of international relations. It is definitely said to have cured the mistakes of the past, that is, the analytical capability that was earlier ignored, namely moral, ethical, ideational foundations of politics have been included in the crude understanding of IR, and it has given more space for humanitarian efforts to sustain and think about a prosperous world community. But at the same time, when we look at the advantages of the concept of human security, right from the UNDP report of 1994 or to forums like United Nations Trust Fund for Human Security, all this, adds definitely, it cements, it mainstreams the inherent human-oriented activities of the UN, but at the same time, the concept of human security remains open-ended question. There is a big debate on the notion of consensus as to what actually defines or what should actually sum up the big vague concept of human security. But one good thing is that it tries to take the focus, as we have debated also all throughout our lecture, away from the state to a people-centered approach to security. Today, we cannot just look at international relations from a one-dimensional perspective of state. New actors have appeared on the international scene, and these new actors are competing in the state versus market discourse, be it our NGOs, our international organizations. All this are making us think that security can just not be debated or limited to absence of fear. Security is no more about absence of threats. Threats can come from new kinds of actors also. Therefore, human security gives a revolutionary turn to the understanding of international relations.